The Christian Viking, Harald Bluetooth. He united Denmark under the cross. Then his own son drove him from it.
Sometime around the year 965 CE, amid the frosty, sweeping winds of the Jutland Peninsula, a Scandinavian king commissioned a monument that would alter the trajectory of Northern Europe forever. He ordered a massive 10-ton triangular block of granite gneiss, standing exactly 2.43 meters tall, to be raised at the ancient royal seat of Jelling. On it, master craftsmen painstakingly carved intricate runic inscriptions and a towering image of Christ, not suffering on a wooden cross, but standing triumphant, wrapped in intertwined branches. This was not merely a declaration of personal religious faith, it was a geopolitical masterstroke, an assertion of supreme authority, and a calculated, high-stakes message directed at the encroaching Holy Roman Empire to the south. The deep-cut runes boldly declared, King Harald ordered this monument made in memory of Gorm, his father, and in memory of Thyra, his mother, that Harald who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. In a single, enduring piece of stone, Harald Bluetooth Gormson authored what historians now call the birth certificate of Denmark, fundamentally transforming a fractured pagan warrior society into a centralized, modernizing European state. Harald Gormson, universally known to history and modern pop culture by his enduring epithet Harald Bluetooth, Old Norse Haraldr Blyton Gormson, Danish Harald Blaton Gormson, was born roughly around the year 920 CE and died circa 986 CE. He was the pivotal 10th century king of Denmark, ruling from approximately 958 to 986, and for a brief but critical period, king of Norway, from circa 970. Operating at the dangerous intersection of regional politics, military conquest, religious reform, and massive infrastructure development, Harald was the grand architect of a unified Danish realm. He is widely considered profoundly influential because he systematically brought Scandinavia out of the Viking Age's localized, chieftain-led raid economy and into the medieval era of centralized monarchies and taxation. By officially introducing Roman Catholicism to the Danes and executing massive, unprecedented engineering projects across 5 different Danish regions, Harald fundamentally redefined Scandinavian society. Today, his name is globally recognized, not just by medieval scholars, but by more than 5 billion people who utilize the wireless communication standard named in his honor, a modern tribute to his historical legacy as an uncompromising unifier. Harald Bluetooth was born into a volatile, fiercely competitive, and deeply fractured world. Early 10th century Scandinavia was a patchwork of warring regional fiefdoms, localized power bases, and competing maritime warlords who relied on the edge of a sword to maintain order. Harald was the son of King Gorm the Old, a staunchly pagan ruler who aggressively controlled the Jutland Peninsula from his royal seat at Jelling, and Thyra, a highly respected and politically active queen whose exact origins are heavily debated by scholars, but who is immortalized on at least 2 surviving runestones. Growing up in the early decades of the 900s, Harald lived in a society deeply rooted in the Old Norse pantheon of Odin, Thor, and Freya. In this environment, political power was maintained through martial prowess, the redistribution of looted silver, and the strict control of the lucrative sea trade routes passing through the Kattegat and Skagerrak Straits. Harald's education was fundamentally martial, naval, and political. He was trained not in the Latin manuscripts of the Christian South, but in the brutal realities of Viking Age statecraft, commanding fleets of longships, managing the volatile loyalty of over 100 regional jarls, earls, and understanding the shifting power dynamics of the Baltic Sea. However, the most pressing reality of his youth was the looming shadow of the Ottonian dynasty. To the south, the Holy Roman Empire was expanding aggressively. In 934 CE, King Henry the Fowler had already defeated a Danish army, forcing the Danes to pay heavy tribute and compelling a localized king named Cnube to accept baptism. This early exposure to the overwhelming military logistics and ideological unity of a Christian empire profoundly shaped the young Harold's understanding of what his own nation needed to become if it were to survive the coming century. The greatest influence on Harold's thinking was the existential threat and undeniable economic allure of the wealthy Christian empires of Western Europe. Traditional Viking Age rulership relied on a fragile consensus among powerful local chieftains, making the kingdom highly unstable and prone to devastating civil wars. Harold quickly realized that the pagan model of decentralized, charismatic authority was no match for the strict administrative, military, and financial power of the Holy Roman Empire, which was now led by Otto I, who was formally crowned emperor by the Pope in 962 CE.
The Catholic Church offered a highly attractive model of kingship ordained by a single, omnipotent God, which legally, politically, and morally elevated a monarch far above his aristocratic rivals. Furthermore, Christianization offered a vital diplomatic shield. Under the laws of the era, a recognized Christian Denmark could not be subjected to a sanctioned papal crusade or a holy war of expansion by Otto I. Another crucial influence was his mother, Queen Thyra. According to strong historical tradition and runic evidence, Thyra was a unifying figure who spearheaded the early expansion of the Danevirke, a massive 30-kilometer system of defensive earthworks across the narrow neck of the Jutland Peninsula.
Her focus on monumental defensive infrastructure became a central pillar of Harold's own later political and military strategy. Finally, the loss of his older brother, Knut, Danasast, who was reportedly killed during an overseas military campaign, left Harold as the sole undisputed heir to Gorm's kingdom, thrusting him into the heavy leadership role that would define the rest of his life. Harold officially transitioned from a martial prince to a ruling monarch upon the death of his father, Gorm the Old, around the winter of 958 CE. His first major act was to solidify the Jelling dynasty's grip on power and visually honor his parents through a massive, unprecedented burial complex. He oversaw the grueling construction of two enormous flat-topped burial mounds in Jelling, each standing roughly 10 meters high and 70 meters in diameter, requiring thousands of tons of turf and earth to be moved by hand. Initially, Harold interred his father in the massive northern mound, strictly honoring the pagan traditions of his ancestors to appease the traditionalist chieftains. However, Harold's political ambitions extended far beyond the mainland of Jutland. Through a ruthless combination of military intimidation, strategic marriages, and economic incentives funded by silver hoards, he began bringing the disparate Danish islands, Zealand, Funen, and the southern tip of modern-day Sweden, Scania, under his direct, centralized control. His early risks included aggressively engaging in the turbulent, blood-soaked politics of neighboring Norway. After the assassination of the Norwegian king Harald Greycloak in 970 CE, Harald Bluetooth saw a geopolitical opening. He formed a strategic military alliance with the powerful Håkon Jarl of Lade, providing him with vital naval and military support to seize control of the Norwegian coast. In return, Håkon agreed to rule Norway as a vassal to Harald, paying taxes and effectively making Harald Bluetooth the supreme overlord of a massive multinational Scandinavian empire. People across the Baltic and the North Sea began to recognize Harald not merely as another regional warlord, but as a sovereign capable of imperial-level multi-generational strategy. The defining breakthrough moment of Harald Bluetooth's life, and a permanent turning point in Northern European history, occurred roughly in the year 965 CE, with his official, public conversion to Christianity. According to the Saxon chronicler Widukind of Corvey, writing shortly after the event, an energetic and charismatic cleric named Poppo arrived at Harold's royal court to preach the Christian faith. When Harald openly questioned whether the Christian god was truly stronger than the ancient Norse gods, Poppo allegedly submitted to a terrifying ordeal by fire, carrying a piece of glowing, red-hot iron in his bare hands. When Poppo emerged unharmed, Widukind claims Harald was convinced of Christ's supremacy and immediately decreed that he and his entire kingdom would be baptized. While the legendary details of the hot iron are heavily mythologized and debated by modern historians, the political reality of the event is undeniable and absolute. Harald's baptism was a brilliant, perfectly timed strategic maneuver. By voluntarily converting, he neutralized the immediate threat of a forced conversion and invasion by the Holy Roman Emperor. To broadcast this massive cultural and legal shift, Harald erected the Great Gelling Stone. In a profound act of historical revisionism, he exhumed his father's body from the pagan burial mound and respectfully reinterred it under the floorboards of a newly built wooden Christian church situated exactly between the two great mounds. This monumental act seamlessly bridged the old, respected pagan legitimacy of his royal bloodline with the new absolute authority of the Christian god. From that moment forward, Harald was no longer just a Viking chieftain. He was officially recognized by the courts of Europe, from Rome to Aachen, as a legitimate Christian king. Harald's 28-year reign was defined by relentless centralization, military expansion, and monumental engineering projects that required staggering logistics. 958 CE, Harald officially ascends to the throne upon the death of Gorm the Old. He inherits Jutland and immediately begins the systematic process of subjugating the independent Danish Isles. c. 965 CE, Harald converts to Christianity, legally shifting Denmark's state religion. He commissions the Great Gelling Stone, establishing the official state-sponsored narrative of a unified Christian Denmark. 970 CE, through complex political maneuvering and the military backing of Håkon Jarl, Harald establishes himself as the suzerain of Norway, expanding his taxable domain and securing crucial northern maritime trade routes. 974 CE, a major military crisis erupts. Holy Roman Emperor Otto II invades Denmark with a massive army, successfully breaching the Dana-Virka defensive line and forcing Harald's forces to retreat. Harald loses control of the southern borderlands and the vital trading city of Hedeby, suffering a devastating economic blow. In response to the growing threat from the German south and boiling internal dissent from his own chieftains, Harald launches the most ambitious military engineering project in Scandinavian history, the Trelleborg ring forts. He constructs at least 5 perfectly circular, geometrically precise military fortresses, including Furkat, Aggersborg, Nonnebakken, Borgring, and Trelleborg, across Denmark. Aggersborg, the largest, featured an inner diameter of 240 meters, housed 48 massive longhouses, and could accommodate an active garrison of up to 5,000 soldiers. 980 CE, Harald commissions and constructs the Ravning-Enge Bridge, an astonishing 760-meter-long, 5-meter-wide oak timber bridge crossing a massive, treacherous wetland valley. Utilizing over 300 massive oak trees, it was capable of bearing heavy siege equipment and troop movements, remaining the longest bridge in Denmark until the 1930s. 983 CE, taking swift advantage of Otto II's disastrous military defeats in Italy and subsequent death, Harald allies with the Slavic Obertrite tribes. He successfully attacks the German garrisons, reconquers the southern border territories, and restores the vital trading hub of Hedeby, fully restoring Denmark's historical borders. Harald Bluetooth is best known as the absolute unifier of Denmark and the visionary monarch who permanently Christianized the Danes. He successfully engineered a massive societal transition that many other Viking societies failed to achieve, transforming a loose, chaotic confederation of autonomous warrior earls into an institutional, bureaucratic medieval state with a functioning infrastructure. People paid intense attention to Harald because he fundamentally altered the physical and economic landscape of Scandinavia.
The sheer scale of the Trelleborg fortresses, built with strict mathematical precision using the standardized Roman foot measurement, demonstrated an unprecedented level of royal administration, organized conscription, and concentrated wealth. He established the first widespread royal mints to strike the korsmynters, cross coins, producing an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 silver coins bearing the Christian cross, permanently tying his realm into the broader European monetary economy. His fame extended far beyond his homeland because the Catholic Church heavily documented his reign, celebrating him in annals and chronicles as a champion of the true faith. By forcibly integrating Denmark into the Christian geopolitical sphere, his name became a permanent fixture in European history, representing the exact moment the barbarian North joined the civilized medieval world order. Analyzing Harald as a human being, stripped of the myth-making of the runestones, reveals a deeply pragmatic, fiercely ambitious, and highly organized leader. His inner motivations appear to have been driven primarily by an unyielding desire for survival, territorial supremacy, and dynastic longevity in a rapidly changing world. Harald was not necessarily a pious religious zealot. Historians widely agree that his embrace of Christianity was highly syncretic and coldly calculated. On the Jelling stone, he deliberately depicted Christ not as a tortured, dying martyr on a cross, but as an upright, victorious warrior king, a deliberate iconographic choice designed to appeal to a fierce population that valued physical strength and martial prowess. His personal working style was characterized by grand, sweeping projects. He possessed a relentless, almost obsessive drive to impose order on a chaotic landscape, evidenced by the perfect, unyielding symmetry of his ring forts. His greatest strength was his foresight, his acute ability to recognize that the era of decentralized, opportunistic raiding was ending, and the era of walled cities, organized taxation, and centralized written law was beginning. However, this exact same drive was undeniably his greatest weakness. The staggering resources, timber and silver required to build the Danevirke expansions, the 5 ring forts, the Ravning Bridge, and his monumental complexes required brutal taxation and the mass-forced conscription of traditionally free farmers. His increasingly authoritarian, top-down leadership style deeply alienated the traditional aristocracy, who felt their ancient liberties and local power were being systematically crushed under his heel. It is vital to include balance, as Harald Bluetooth's towering ambition ultimately triggered his own violent downfall, and modern historians point to catastrophic failures in his latter years. While he proudly claimed on stone to have won Norway, his actual control over the rugged northern territory was brittle and heavily debated. By the late 970s, his vassal, Håkon Jarl, fiercely rejected Harald's attempts to force Christianity onto the fiercely pagan Norwegians. Håkon outright rebelled, refusing to pay tribute and successfully defeating Harald's naval invasion forces at the legendary Battle of Hjørungavåg. The exact historicity of the battle's details is debated, though the factual loss of Norway during this period is historically verified. Furthermore, Håkon faced intense, boiling domestic criticism. The massive, relentless public works projects of the late 770s and 780s drained the economy, depleted local forests, and exhausted the laboring populace. The old pagan chieftains deeply resented the forced imposition of foreign Christian priests and the total loss of their local judicial autonomy. This simmering resentment finally culminated in a massive, fatal civil rebellion circa 986 CE. The uprising was led by his own illegitimate son, Sweyn Forkbeard, Sweyn Forkbeard, who cunningly capitalized on the widespread aristocratic anger against his father's heavy-handed modernization. During a naval clash or a subsequent land skirmish near the Baltic coast, Harald was severely wounded by an arrow. He fled into exile to the legendary Slavic stronghold of Jomsborg, widely believed to be the Viking settlement of Wolin in modern-day Poland, where he died from his wounds shortly after.
To his contemporaries and early critics like Adam of Bremen, his final days represented the tragic, humiliating failure of a king who pushed his people further and faster than they were willing to endure. Harold's direct influence on the politics, religion, and infrastructure of Northern Europe was absolute and long-lasting. In the short term, his sudden death and the subsequent civil war plunged Denmark into a brief period of violent instability. But ironically, his son, Sweyn Forkbeard, ultimately utilized the very centralized state, naval capacity, and military infrastructure Harold built to launch full-scale, devastating invasions of England, eventually conquering the English throne. Harold directly impacted the geography of power in Northern Europe by heavily fortifying the Danevik and establishing the Trelleborg forts. He successfully shielded Denmark from being permanently absorbed into the expanding Holy Roman Empire, preserving its status as a distinct independent kingdom for the next millennium. Culturally and religiously, his royal mandate of Christianity ended the official, state-sponsored practice of Norse paganism. Over the long term, this monumental shift integrated Scandinavia into the vast Latin literacy network, European diplomatic channels, and standard canon law. He fundamentally changed the basic societal structure from a chieftain-based kinship system to a feudal-leaning monarchy based on land taxation, royal decree, and centralized military garrisons. However, negative consequences heavily emerged from his reign. The forceful, systematic destruction of the old religion led to the irreversible loss of vast amounts of indigenous cultural heritage, and the centralization of royal power stripped the traditional peasant assemblies, the things, of much of their historic democratic influence and local voice. Today, Harald Bluetooth is remembered and revered as the founding father of the modern Danish state. His historical reputation has evolved dramatically over 1,000 years, shifting from the image of a controversial, heavy-handed, exiled monarch to that of a visionary statesman and master builder. The Jelling stones and the associated church and mound complex are now a strictly protected UNESCO World Heritage Site, and an image of the Great Jelling Stones Christ figure is famously printed inside every modern Danish passport, actively emphasizing its status as the nation's foundational document. Furthermore, extensive archaeological work in the 20th and 21st centuries has uncovered the true, staggering scale of his ring forts, cementing his reputation as an architectural genius. However, in a bizarre, unpredictable, but highly fitting twist of modern history, Harold's most globally recognized legacy is in the realm of digital technology. In 1997, engineers from Intel, Ericsson, and Nokia were desperately trying to develop a new, standardized short-range wireless communication protocol to connect disparate electronic devices. Jim Kardak of Intel, who had recently read a book on Vikings recommended by Ericsson engineer Sven Mattisson, formally proposed the working name, Bluetooth. He reasoned to his colleagues that just as King Harald had united fractured Scandinavia, this new wireless technology would unite the fractured PC and cellular industries. The working name permanently stuck. The official, globally recognized blue logo for Bluetooth technology is a direct bind rune merging Harald's initials in the Old Norse Younger Futhark runic alphabet, Hagal and Bjarkan. Thus, a 10th century Viking king's name is now a permanent daily fixture on billions of smartphones, laptops, audio speakers, and wireless devices worldwide. The life of Harald Bluetooth stands as a profound, often brutal study in the necessary, violent mechanics of historical transition. He was a king permanently caught between two wildly different ages, the fading, bloody twilight of the pagan Viking warlord, and the dawning institutional reality of the Christian European monarch. His undeniable successes boldly reveal the power of visionary infrastructure and strategic adaptation, proving that a leader who firmly controls the cultural narrative, as Harald literally did in 10 tons of stone at Jelling, can permanently redefine a nation's identity for centuries. Yet his violent, tragic end at the hands of his own son serves as a timeless, sobering warning about the absolute limits of centralized power. Harald's life demonstrates that while a ruler may possess the supreme intelligence to see the future and the immense courage to build it, forcing a traditional society to abandon its deep-rooted customs too quickly almost always breeds a violent resentment that even the strongest circular fortresses cannot contain. Ultimately, Harald Bluetooth successfully built the permanent foundations of a unified modern nation, but he had to be sacrificed upon those very foundations in order for that nation to endure.